Big deficits, big business tax breaks, and a big controversy around a $600 million bailout for the media. Those are some of the highlights of the finance minister's new mini budget, the so-called fiscal update. Remember that Liberal promise to balance the budget by next year? Snapped like an icicle. The deficit will be close to $19 billion, but don't worry, the government argues, because the overall debt will actually be lower. So what happened? To find out, we're now joined by the finance minister himself, Bill Morneau. Great to see you, sir.
Happy to be here.
Let's talk about the fiscal update and the deficits. $2 billion higher than projected. No path to balance right now to 2024. So the government, your government, broke the promise of modest deficits of $10 billion that by the end of this mandate you were supposed to reach balance. Why don't deficits like this bother you?
Well, what you know that we've been focused on from day one is how do we ensure that our economy continues to do well? From our standpoint, that means thinking about how do we make sure the growth is there? How do we make sure more Canadians are working? Those two things have gone very well. So the approach we've taken, investing in Canadians, has meant that the economy's turned around. We've got a level of growth that's strong. We have 550,000 new jobs over the last 3 years, lowest rate of unemployment in 40 years. So this is a very positive situation. And our view is that we can do that in a fiscally responsible way. That's what we've demonstrated. We've maintained that debt as a function of our economy, and we're lowering it over time.
Okay, but the logic is, what you're saying is you stimulated the economy with spending in order to ensure growth. So there's been some growth. Now there's some headwinds, whether it's the price of oil, the trade war with China and the US. These are potential headwinds. The worry is if there's a setback, you've got to stimulate again for growth, and you never get out of deficit. So it's essentially a constant form of structural deficit.
Well, it's not. Let's just acknowledge the fact that that's actually not the facts of the situation. First of all, always important to think about where you are. And our debt as a function of our economy, which you know is a very favorable position. I mean, the hard work that the Chrétien and Martin government did way back when created a much better situation. So we've got a very, very positive balance sheet. That's the frame. And what we need to do is maintain that. And that's what we're doing. We are reducing that debt as a function of GDP. We need to keep on that track. We also know that we need to make investments for the future. And if businesses don't invest to create great jobs, then we won't have the future that we want in our country.
Okay, and you're right. The so-called fiscal anchor, the debt to GDP ratio, is going down. Let me just move to the other side. One of the stimulus side, what you've done is $14 billion over a number of years to corporations in order to increase investment. Let's call it a response to the Trump corporate tax cuts. Why do you believe that would stimulate growth and investment in the economy?
I think we always need to recognize that situations change. And the international situation clearly has changed over the last couple of years in multiple ways. But one of the ways is that the tax environment's changed. So when the United States decided to allow businesses to much more rapidly write off investments, it created an unequal playing field. So what we decided was that we were going to make sure that if there's going to be an unequal playing field, it's going to be to our benefit. And that's exactly what we did. We've made it so that the next investment that a business might make is going to be 5% advantaged if they do it in Canada.
On the other side, some could say, look, we're already pretty competitive because we have a low dollar compared to the United States. Our oil's low. We give health care. Instead of giving corporations tax breaks, who knows what they're going to spend those tax breaks on? You could, for example, have a national pharmacare program. A new study out says 730,000 Canadians are borrowing money to pay for drugs. Instead, you've given breaks to corporations, and people are going broke paying for medicine. Why that choice?
Let's start with saying that it's not either or. We had a fall economic update yesterday. We still have a budget that's coming in 2019. And, you know, I would just challenge a little bit of what you said in terms of what we're doing. We've actually made it so that the only way that corporations get an advantage is if they actually make an investment. So they have to make the investment in order to get that advantage. So we're not giving a reduced corporate tax rate, which would advantage, you know, investments made yesterday. We're only making advantage for investments made tomorrow. So that's critically important.
Are you considering a national pharmacare program? Is that on the table?
Well, we've said from day one that we want to make sure that pharmacare is something that works in our country. That's why we have an advisory committee looking at it right now. They're going to report back to us, and we want to ensure that we have a system that works well for all Canadians. That's our goal.
Big thing in this fiscal update, the missing piece is the energy sector. The price of oil, Canadian oil, as you know, is at historic lows. Every $5 drop in the price of Canadian oil, the federal government loses about $1 billion. This is historic lows. Why did you not have something specifically for the energy sector there? Can you tell us?
Well, it wasn't a missing piece for the energy sector. We acknowledge and realize the enormous challenge that people in Alberta, that businesses in Alberta and Saskatchewan are facing because of that price differential. It's a Canadian issue because, as you point out, we're challenged across the country because of that issue. But what we've said is we need to first of all think about the long term, and that's why we've looked at getting access to international markets through pipelines. And second of all, the measures we put in place with the fall economic statement, they're for all businesses, in all sectors, in all geographies of our country. And of course, the oil and gas sector are big investors in the economy. So we've created an opportunity for any business, including businesses in Alberta, to have an advantage with new investments.
But frankly, the easy fix is to build that pipeline. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is the easiest fix for this whole solution. Financially, trade diversity, all of that. You and I have had this discussion. When are shovels going on the ground? When is the consultation going to be over? When is that pipeline going to be built? Can you give us any solid information on that?
What we want to make sure is that we deal with the advice we got effectively from the federal court. They said very clearly that we need to think about the West Coast. We've got a process in place with National Energy Board to do that. It's constrained. We said it was 22 weeks. We also need to consult with Indigenous peoples. And for that to be meaningful, I'm not going to give you a deadline. We're going to do it in a way that meaningfully engages, and obviously we're trying to do it in a way that has the appropriate time required. Our goal is to do this the right way, which is the only way that we're actually going to complete this. So those people those people that say, okay, give us an exact timeline, are actually making it less likely that we would get this done the right way.
But families are losing their jobs. I mean, this is it's a crisis, a national crisis.
And therefore, we need to do it the right way so we get it right, and that's what we're doing.
Last thing, you've announced new subsidies for the journalism industry. Now, to be fair, the journalism industry lobbied hard for this, but almost $600 million. The opposition has argued that your government is trying to buy off the media, right? And I think one of the key hinges is your government says you're going to appoint an independent committee to decide who gets the money where. How is that committee going to be appointed? And my concern about this, well, I know some journalism organizations may like it, is this will only increase the cynicism around journalism, that it's biased, that it's in favor of the government, and that only the voices that your government deems appropriate, that you like and your committee likes, will get the cash.
Well, let me just give you a little bit of my experience being in this role. I haven't found it plausible or possible in any way to actually get journalists to say what I want them to say. You know, I'd like it if the next time we're together, I can ask you to say exactly what I want, but it doesn't seem to be the way it works. We just think that a strong free press is essential for a strong democracy. As simply put as that. We know that the only way we can do this is by having an independent body to adjudicate how these
But who appoints them? I mean, it's critical. You understand that. I understand your intention, but you understand how the unanticipated consequence is it could actually give the impression of the exact opposite, that everybody's at the government's trough and there's no independence. That's a problem.
You know, I'll acknowledge that that there's a degree of cynicism in your question. But what I can say to you is that we need to find a way to get an independent group of experts, including the journalist sector, to actually come up with an approach to make sure that we get a range of voices. We've committed to doing that. We'll have more information about how we're going to do that in the coming days and weeks. But it's important. Free press matters.
Yeah, I would say skepticism, not cynicism. Mr. Morneau, always a pleasure to have you here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.